I would just like to give this opportunity if there are colleagues who would want to share a few thoughts. I do see that comments are coming in on the chat function. Anyone who wants to come in, you can raise your hands. Well, at the same time, I'll just read the messages that are coming through. Congratulations, Prof. Julie. This is from Prof. Colin Chassis. You are challenging the totalitarianism by the big tech companies. To quote the erudite Professor Daniels, I'm tremendously fascinated by the idea of delusive speech. It is invaluable that you raise it within this highly relevant space. It is important that we continue to challenge the scope of our scholarship in the way you are showing us. Viva. This is just one of the latest comments we got from Prof. Colin Chassis. Any response, comments before we do our vote of thanks and closing remarks? Colleagues? All right, Prof. Mpofu, please come in.
I think Prof. Daniels had asked Julie to sort of explain more on how big tech benefits from scams, right? And also, I'm thinking also about banks, Prof. Reid. When you are scammed, I think if it's within 24 hours, you want to reverse the transaction, my bank will actually charge me for that reversal of the transaction. And in some instances, they actually refund you even after 3 months. And for me, the benefit really I've seen in some social media instances where people rave about how bank X and X came for me when I was scammed, and then they refunded me back the whole amount. And that sort of acts as a marketing sort of plan or a marketing exercise on the part of the banks. And definitely, I would imagine that they would profile the customers that they refund and those that they sort of don't refund. So maybe, Pomuso, you can ask Prof. Julie to cast a bit of more light on how big tech companies benefit from scams on their platforms.
Yes, I'd be quite happy to respond to those two questions, and I see one from Ivan in the chat. Let me do that one first. He asked me, did you get any backlash from Airbnb yet? I was expecting a backlash actually, and so was my publisher at Routledge, and we prepared for that. We prepared for lawsuits, but no, we haven't heard anything. It's been cricket so far. So. I don't know why that is. I don't know what Airbnb strategy is, but yeah, I'm expecting the backlash to come at any point. Prof. Mpofu, Shepherd, in terms of banks marketing themselves, in terms of being quick to process reverse transactions, yeah, they used to do that in the past. Now, I don't have any data to support this because this wasn't the focus of my study, but from talking to a variety and several scam victims, I think what's happening at the banks is that at first they were quite quick to refund you if you had been a victim of a scam and you called them to process the transaction or to reverse the transaction. But then what was happening often was that the bank actually couldn't, because the scammers are becoming a lot more sophisticated, the banks can't always recover the funds from the scammers. So what they then do is the bank then has to take the financial hit and pay that money to their client, but they've actually lost that money to the scammers. So because the scam industry is becoming so widespread now, and financial fraud is just becoming such a gargantuan problem, it's actually starting to cost banks an enormous amount of money. And I think the banks, for their part, have just realized that if they reverse every single transaction that they get a request to do it, that they are going to actually, their business will suffer tremendously. So I think that's why the banks themselves are becoming a lot more reluctant to process reverse transactions these days. Then just in terms of some more detail on what I mean when I say these big tech platforms profit from crimes. I've already given you some examples of that in terms of Airbnb. Now, Airbnb should do something about its fake listings problem. And it has done a few things, but not nearly enough. Airbnb should allow for its own users to post negative reviews if those reviews are honest, but it doesn't allow that. And the reason it does that is because it doesn't have a financial incentive to put those processes in place. Because if they get too many negative reviews, there'll be a reduction in bookings and they won't earn. Sorry, guys. My voice is leaving me. Sorry, I have a cold. Too many negative reviews means lower bookings. And so they lose profits if they do something about guys, sorry, I'm going to have to take a break. My voice is gone. So as I was saying, Airbnb has tried to do some things about their fake listings problem. But remember this, if a scammer posts a fake listing on Airbnb and you book that fake listing, Airbnb is still going to earn the booking fee from that fake listing, whether the listing itself is real or not. So Airbnb doesn't have a financial incentive to completely delete all of the fake listings on its platform, because if it did that, I mean, we don't know how many fake listings there are on Airbnb, but if they did delete and properly verify all of their properties, the number of listings listed on Airbnb as properties might be cut in half. And then Airbnb loses half of its business. But we've also seen this on a number of other big tech platforms. So, for example, in many cases, other researchers have found that on Facebook, scammers are actually running advertisements. That's how brazen they are. They are running advertisements for their scam offerings. So people will run advertisement for fake cryptocurrency exchanges, for example. Facebook doesn't take those adverts down because if they started doing that, they would lose advertising revenue. And then we've seen it on YouTube as well. We've seen a number, there was actually a big study that was done by WithSecure, where they did a study of the number of YouTube channels that were being run by scammers on YouTube. And there was one particular group of scammers that they focused on, where they found these were cryptocurrency scammers as well. And the theme of their channel was to coach people on how to invest in cryptocurrency. It was all a scam. It was a fake crypto exchange. And if you paid any money into that crypto exchange, your money would be stolen. It wasn't an investment. It was just an all-out scam. YouTube didn't take those channels down because, again, they're running ads on those channels. So if they took all of those channels down, they would lose the eyeballs to all of those advertisements and they would lose revenue once again. So it's generally a case of follow the money. And if you follow the money, what you do is you reach the explanation for the lack of incentivization that these big tech companies have to actually make their platform safer. By hosting this criminal content, they're still making money off of that criminal content. And so they don't really have a financial incentive to take it down. So I hope that make things a little bit clearer. Thanks.
Thank you, Prof. There's another question. Before I go to the question on the chat, Prof. Ro, I saw that your hand was up, or was the question attended to while Prof. Reid was speaking?
No, thank you. It's fine. I can ask the question. I was just thinking here, if Prof. Reid, in your data, did you pick up anything on the structure of delusive speech? If there's a pattern, certain structures, use of certain words, is there anything that is recognizable and can be studied as signs of this delusive speech? The way that they write in selling houses, immaculate, and the structure. But did you pick up something like that that would distinguish something as delusive speech? Thank you.
Absolutely, yes. So yes, I did. But as I explained earlier, this is something that has to be studied depending on the platform that you're looking at, because the technical architecture of Airbnb is very different to the technical architecture of a platform like YouTube or Facebook. They work very differently. And so delusive speech is structured very differently on these different platforms. So when you're going to study delusive speech, you have to understand the ins and outs and the back end of the particular platform that you're looking at. But in terms of the Airbnb delusive speech, yeah, there were some trends. So first of all, one of the trends that the scammers would do is, and this is actually a red flag that you can look for when you're looking for property on Airbnb, is what the scammers would usually do is obviously they would post wonderful photographs of a listing that, for example, doesn't exist, and it looks very nice. Often at the time when I was doing the research, often the images of the photographs could actually be traced with reverse search imaging software, and you would always find that these images had been stolen usually from estate agents' websites. So it was someone's real home. And the property photographs, but the property photographs could be for a house in California, but the listing is advertising this property in Denmark. And the owner and the real estate agent aren't aware that their property images have actually been plagiarized. One of the dangers now is that all of that can be faked with AI. So these guys don't even have to plagiarize property images anymore. And doing a reverse search on Airbnb now actually won't help you, because the progeny of the image actually can't be traced. The second thing that scammers on Airbnb will do is they will go to high revenue markets with high tourism traffic, because they know that that's where they're going to get the most frequent bookings. So see a lot of scams, Glenda, I'm so sorry, but you see a lot of scams happening in central London, cities like Paris, and before they banned Airbnb outright, this was happening in New York. So they'll go to high tourist traffic areas, and they will post listings in very expensive neighborhoods in those areas. And then all they have to do is make their listing a little bit cheaper than all of the surrounding properties, because they know they're going to get entrap someone that way, because lots of people travel to these cities. These cities are very expensive. And so when you are browsing through Airbnb listings, when there's one in a very sought after neighborhood that is just a little bit cheaper than all the others, of course, you're going to jump on that one and book that one because you want to stay there because it's so much cheaper than everywhere else. So yes, there are trends that you can pick up when you're hunting down delusive speech on these platforms. But as I said before, it is going to vary depending on the architecture of the platform that you're looking at. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. I see Louise's hand is up. Before Louise comes in, Prof. Milton thanks you for the fascinating work. A softball question: to what extent do platforms reproduce colonial modes of control through surveillance, moderation, and algorithmic decision-making, especially when dealing with speech marked as delusive? In other words, is there a digital coloniality in how speech is policed or not? And could you give some examples from your case studies?
Okay, so thanks, Viola, for that question. That actually falls fairly outside of the scope of the study that I was looking at. And to say, especially when dealing with speech that is marked as delusive, it's difficult to know whether surveillance is happening on the speech by companies like Airbnb and others, or algorithmic surveillance, because in all of the sort of public-facing commentary from these companies, when they're talking about what they're doing to try to combat crime on their platforms, every now and then one of these scams will hit the headlines, and then company spokespersons are forced to speak about it publicly. They try very much to front the same narrative. And that is, number one, they pretend to be completely shocked that one person was made a victim of a crime on their platform, right? Which is completely inaccurate in terms of the scale of the problem. But then they also try to deny the fact that it's happening. So it's not really possible to know. Only Airbnb is going to know what's happening with their algorithms. And of course, all of that information is proprietary and it's not made available to researchers. So I honestly can't answer the question. The one thing that I did notice, though, in terms of Airbnb and their sort of mentality of coloniality, is that Airbnb is not immune to the idea that crime is happening on their platform, and they have got mechanisms in place to deal with these crimes when they do happen. So they do have rapid response teams all around the world that are supposed to respond when victims do fall victim to a crime or a scam via Airbnb. Those are not effective. But then the most telling thing was they have something that they call the Trust and Safety Advisory Coalition. And it's this coalition that meets 4 times a year and comes up with all these big plans of how to make the platform safer. The first thing that I noticed was that all of the safety mechanisms that they implement on Airbnb are all sort of mostly dedicated to the Airbnb platform in the United States and in Canada. And these same safety mechanisms aren't rolled out. Airbnb operates in, I think, 189 countries around the world, and they're only concerned about safety in 2 countries. And the second thing that I found very problematic was that the representation of people on their Trust and Safety Advisory Coalition, it's people from think tanks, like, think tanks to prevent child trafficking, think tanks to prevent suicide, because suicides happen quite frequently in Airbnbs, human trafficking, child porn, and so on and so on. So there's a whole bunch of, safety-minded NGOs and think tanks that come together and think about how to make the Airbnb platform safer. The problem is that every single one of the representatives on the Airbnb Trust and Safety Advisory Coalition are all from the United States, except for one, and that country representative is from Canada. And so my argument is that, look, if you want to be a global company, there are safety issues that would apply because of local specificities in a place like Nigeria or Argentina that don't apply in North America. So why aren't you talking to representatives from all of these other countries that could explain local conditions to you and see where the safety gaps are in your platform? So that was, the one thing that I could address in terms of that colonial mentality is they really, they only give a voice in their safety discussions to representatives from North America, which I think is really worrying when you consider that they operate in almost all countries in the world. I think Louise had her hand up.
Yes, I wanted to check. Louise, did she touch on what you wanted to ask?
No, I just actually wanted to respond to the question Prof Rowe had about how do you see a speech pattern or something like that. Now, sorry, Julie, it's not Airbnb, and it's not really a policy type of issue, more a victim type of comment, but it happened to me once that a guy was speaking to me on the phone, a scammer, and it was the way in which he was speaking that he was so good, so very good at it. But it was the most minuscule difference in the way my first thought was they got this guy transferred from sales to the fraud department because he was just a little bit too excited that my credit card was gone or hacked.
Yeah.
So and that is a speech in a very shallow type of way, of course, but a manner of speaking that it is definitely delusional, delusive speech, but I saw it for what it was because there was something wrong someone didn't make sense in what the situation was and how he was speaking. I just wanted to add that. It's not.
No, I think that's very important, Louise, what you're saying. I mean, at the end of the day, what happened to you was you were switched on and you managed to use your own street smarts to save yourself. And ideally, that's what we want for anyone who comes into contact with the scammer. But we have to remember, guys, that we're talking about we're talking about organized crime, right? I mean, yes, you do get the odd individual scammer sitting somewhere who is a lone wolf but for the most part, we're talking about huge criminal syndicates that are perpetuating scam activity at scale. And they are incredibly sophisticated. Not only that, but they have literally had decades to perfect their social engineering tactics. I probably shouldn't be saying this. I've been on the dark web where you can find scam manuals that tell you exactly how to speak, exactly how to enter into a conversation. Basically, they're communication manuals for how to communicate with a target. And the reason why these criminal industries are so large and so profitable is because it works. And I think that it's time for us to let go of the stigmatization, because we often, a lot of scam victims, report feeling terribly embarrassed and stigmatized because they have fallen victim to a scam. But I think it's really time that we say goodbye to that stigmatization, because the reason why the scam industry is so incredibly successful is because scamming works. They know just how to push our buttons. And they know just how to convince you. But having said that, still, I remind you that it's not always about social engineering. You can be scammed when you are literally just going about your day-to-day activity. And that's what I think makes scams on the sharing economy so dangerous, is that these platforms have been designed specifically to elicit money from us. We go there expecting to give our money away, and these platforms algorithmically, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes funnel us in the direction of fake products and scammers and put us in harm's way. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much. I took a call from a student, so I might have missed this. So maybe I'm reversing a little bit. And this is an issue regarding what Prof. Daniels did touch on with big corporate companies like your Meta, Alphabet. They can't even release their simple statistics in the country, not only ours, but in many, which means that regulation for them is difficult. When it comes to the issues that you have expressed, Prof, what is the regulation framework? What are the issues there? And what is being done, or what can be done?
I think that's an excellent question, Refiwa. It's difficult. One of the problems that we have is that all of these, most of the platforms that have become so ubiquitous in modern life are based in the United States, in Silicon Valley. And so what a lot of activists around the world are saying is that if regulation comes, it needs to come from the Americans. And the one case where that has happened actually is Uber, which happened from a very strong lobby of American women who had been assaulted by their Uber drivers. And in 2023, the Americans actually passed a law that insists that Uber properly verifies and does criminality checks on their drivers. And then it also banished that 3 strikes rule that Uber has. So basically, every driver that operates on Uber is allowed to get 3 complaints against them before they're banned from the platform. And it doesn't matter what those complaints are. If you complain that your Uber driver has raped you, Uber's position was generally, well, he's allowed to rape 2 other women before we take him off the platform. Now the Americans have passed a law that has got very, very strong oversight over Uber. But the problem with that is, and I mean, that's great. Uber now has to, by law, publish their safety statistics and how many crimes have happened in Ubers, how many deaths, how many rapes, and so on and so on. They have to publish annual or 6-monthly safety reports in the US. That's great. But again, Uber operates in 190, I think it's 110 countries. So that's one country where it's now being properly regulated by lawmakers. And what about all the others? So, I mean, this is going to be a very difficult, again, we're dealing with borderless problems with border-bound solutions. Is every government now expected to pass laws for every single one of these big tech platforms? Because, of course, a one-size-fits-all approach is not going to work either. As I said earlier, each platform works differently, so each platform is going to require different regulation. So it's going to be a long and slow process. But yeah, I don't know what the solution is, but I think that regulation is part of the answer. It's not the only answer. I think that these big tech platforms should be made to take some of the responsibility on themselves. and honestly just assess their own safety loopholes to make their platform safer. That would already go a long way. But if they're not going to do that, and if we do have to resort to regulation then and legislation, then it's something that unfortunately I think we're going to have to get cracking on a much wider scale. Because I mean, where Uber is being currently regulated by law in the US, the law is actually named after Samantha Josephson, who was a woman who was murdered by an Uber driver. There's no equivalent law like that for any other sharing economy platform in the US. So we are way behind in terms of drafting legislation and regulations on this.